So for those of you who are probably aware now, Kevin McCarthy has indeed been ousted as Speaker of the House. This, of course, was led by Matt Gaetz. He really did not like the fact that Kevin McCarthy was willing to bend to the Democratic Party and the rest of the Republican congressmen and women as well in reference to that Ukraine funding. So that's something that Matt Gaetz has heavily pushed back against. He does not think we need to give more money to Ukraine. And Kevin McCarthy was willing to bend on that. Now, we all need to remember, going back to the Speaker nomination, Matt Gaetz did not want Kevin McCarthy to be Speaker. Remember, there were those several like votes. They voted over and over again. I think this process lasts for about a week. They were essentially, Matt Gaetz and the Freedom Caucus were forcing the vote against Kevin McCarthy, which is exactly what we asked the squad to do in reference to Nancy Pelosi. Eventually, they ended up going with McCarthy and getting some concessions in return. But apparently, Matt Gaetz didn't take his eye off the ball, because he basically said, look, Kev, you slip up once and I'm going to make sure you're out. And now Kevin McCarthy is gone. Gone, gone, gone. In the words of NSYNC, gone, gone. Let's get into it.
And that breaking news, Matt Gaetz, the Republican congressman, has filed that motion to remove Kevin McCarthy as Speaker of the House. The first time that this has happened in more than 100 years. Let's listen to Matt Gaetz speaking to reporters right now.
And as I said in my remarks on the floor earlier today, regardless of how you feel about Ukraine money or border money, these two things should not be lumped together. They deserve their own dignity and their own vote. And the people are tired of seeing the ways of Washington that jam everything together in order to really frustrate actual legislators.
If you succeed, if you succeed, McCarthy's almost certainly going to put himself up as a candidate for Speaker again. And that may mean there's no one who can get 218 votes. Are you prepared to go through that possibility with no one getting 218 votes?
Well, I would think that if it took Kevin McCarthy 15 rounds to become Speaker, and after 8 months of a failed speakership, and after a successful removal vote, as your hypothesis would portend, that he would take a hint.
Do you have someone?
This guy gives zero fucks, okay? This is what we wanted Jamal Bowman, AOC, this is what we wanted them to do. Matt Gaetz is not caving to any kind of pressure. Have you noticed this? How he's just like, no, he's standing firm and solid on what he believes. And it's just too bad that we didn't see this behavior come from the squad. They should have been leading that fight, particularly a strategy that's in the DSA handbook that they could have just easily followed. But now they let the Republicans force a vote. And they've shown that it actually can work. But Matt Gaetz does not care. He doesn't care if he's going to be criticized because of it. He's still standing firm on what he believes. That is exactly what the squad was supposed to do. Let's continue.
Any Democrats about this? If it were serious, you'd be trying to convince them.
Look, I have made no deal with Democrats because I believe that Democrats should vote against Kevin McCarthy for free. It's Kevin McCarthy who's out there offering deals to Democrats. So if there's a deal made with Democrats, the only deal is to make one with McCarthy, because I'm not offering anything and won't offer anything. And by the way, if the Democrats want to own Kevin McCarthy, they can have it. Because one thing I'm at peace with is when we stand here a week from now, I won't own Kevin McCarthy anymore. He won't belong to me. So if the Democrats want to adopt him, they can adopt him.
Look at how he just tossed Kevin McCarthy to the side like that. He said if the Democratic Party wants to have him, they can have him. Wouldn't you have loved to see somebody say this in reference to Nancy Pelosi? You know what? You guys like Pelosi so much. Why don't you just have her? Wouldn't you have loved to see someone say that? Take her away. We don't want her. Couldn't do that. They were too weak.
If you're successful, who would be your alternative? Who would you be putting up there if you're successful?
Look, our number 2 is Steve Scalise. I think very highly of Steve Scalise. I would vote for Steve Scalise. I would probably vote for at least 100 Republicans in our caucus and maybe 100 other Americans out there who wouldn't necessarily need to be a member of the body to be considered for the speakership. But I am not going to pass over Steve Scalise just because he has blood cancer and is going through treatment.
Damn. Like, it just to say the things that he just said.
What would you say to members who have worked so hard to try and get these appropriation bills through? That's finally happening. Now they say they don't want to be distracted from that. What do you say to those members who don't want to vote against McCarthy for that reason?
Well, mostly I would say you're welcome, because we weren't endeavoring on the appropriations process earnestly until we held a political gun to the speaker's head last week. We left for a 6-week vacation, and we'd only passed one of our appropriations bills, the veterans bill. If Kevin McCarthy was serious about appropriations, we'd have been here all of July, we would have been here in August, and we would have been doing the people's work, passing their budget. The American people are tired of Washington, D.C. not having a budget, running $2 trillion annual deficits, sitting atop a $33 trillion debt. And if this country's going down, I'm going down fighting.
You know, I wouldn't say the American people are, tired of the government not having a budget. I think the American people are tired of the government using the money from the budget to help out other people besides the people in this country. I think that's where a lot of Americans are. Like, you keep giving money to Ukraine, but you can't help people out here, or they won't. They're not willing to help out people here. I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes from. But the boldness of Matt Gaetz to just say what he just said and not care if he loses his seat. Like, this makes, I remember when AOC was running and how bold she sounded, and the way that Cori Bush sounded so bold. And when AOC first got in, she was, protesting outside Nancy Pelosi's office. I remember all that stuff in the beginning, and then they just, became just quiet little mouse, and they fell in line. Imagine if they spoke this way. Imagine if they came in with that kind of fire and said, well, if Nancy Pelosi doesn't want this, then it is what it is, but I don't have to vote for it and I'm not going to. Imagine if they did that.
I mean, it's happening now, right? Y'all were supposed to be back home in your districts. That hasn't happened. There are appropriation bills on the calendar. I know it might have taken a while to get here, but you're here. And so what do you say to your colleagues who say we can't support this because we want to get this done? We want to get the government funded.
Well, I would suggest if we were real serious about that process, we wouldn't be having 4-day work weeks. I mean, we started votes tonight at 6:30 p.m. on a Monday. Most Americans don't start work at 6:30 p.m. on a Monday and end a few hours later, right?
I disagree with that. See, he's talking about people that work like a 9 to 5, right? See, again, this goes back to them being in that DC bubble and a class issue. Because see, for a lot of the people that are congressmen and that are senators, like for them, like the people that they know, they do have like that typical 9 to 5 job, right? And some people work in government have a 4-day work week. But what about all the people that work third shift? And that includes nurses too, by the way. What about the people that work at night? Like when I waited tables, I worked in the evening. So there's still that disconnect here. Let's continue.
So I don't believe that the level of effort that you're seeing out of the Congress this week is reflective of the momentum that we had built previously.
But you're going to need Democrats. You're going to need Democrats to vote with you to oust McCarthy. And you're criticizing McCarthy for having to potentially need Democrats to keep him in the job. I mean, aren't you pretty much doing the exact same thing here?
Mono, the yellow brick road of working with Democrats has been paved, constructed, engineered, and architected by Kevin McCarthy. Look no further than the debt limit deal, a deal he passed with Democrats. Look no further than the last continuing resolution, which he passed with Democrats. And by the way, if he's able to stay in power, it will be him working for the Democrats, continuing to do their bidding. So this is a revealing exercise, and I think it'll show the country who's really in charge.
Just to follow up on that, though, most Republicans still do support McCarthy. So why bring this up if you don't have the support of most of your conference?
Well,
that question right there, most Republicans still support Kevin McCarthy. So what she's basically saying is you should go along with party majority. No, if you are trying to act the way the Tea Party did, if you're trying to act the way the squad was supposed to, and you have that narrow majority, which is exactly what they have here, part of the Freedom Caucus, you use that to your advantage.
He doesn't have my support anymore, and he doesn't have the support of a requisite number of Republicans to continue as the Republican Speaker. Now, he may continue as the House Speaker, and he may continue as a Speaker of the Democrats and some sort of uniparty coalition, but he is not going to be a Speaker in power as a consequence of Republican votes based on the number of people who are going to be with me.
Is this like a personal disagreement you have with McCarthy, or is this solely just on...
You know, it's so funny that I come out here, and I've been doing this for a great number of days with all of you, and I lay out in Technicolor the specific areas of breach of the agreement: breaching the 72-hour rule, breaching the suspension rule, blowing past the top lines, not passing single subject spending bills. And yet the McCarthy operation continues to try to make this some sort of personal beef. No one seems to be real eager in engaging me on the substance of my argument, which is that we need single subject spending bills. We need to return to pre-COVID spending. But some people try to make every policy disagreement personal because they are so personally embarrassed from their own failures. And so this has nothing to do with a personality. This has to do with breach of an agreement. I laid that breach out weeks ago. I stood on the floor. You all covered it. And I said, these are the areas of breach. They have to be rectified. Instead of getting any sincere effort to resolve that, you know, we heard the speaker's profanity and his bluster, and that's simply not strong leadership.
So this is about holding people accountable, right? So when he's talking about that breach, remember, let's all remember here that when they did decide to vote for Kevin McCarthy, remember that came with some concessions. And one of the things that Matt Gaetz specifically had mentioned that I remember was the single subject bills. A single subject bill actually would be a good thing if you think about how some people have voted along with bills because it had one good thing in it. Like Bernie Sanders said he voted along for Joe Biden's crime bill because it had the protection against the violence against women. So the single subject bills actually is a good thing. Now, in reference to who becomes speaker now, there seems to be this misconception that you actually have to be a member of Congress to become Speaker of the House. Turns out you actually don't. And some people have actually hinted towards the fact that they would actually prefer for Donald Trump to be Speaker of the House. That message got back to Donald Trump. And now this apparently is happening. Just in, Trump is considering a visit to Capitol next week where he is open to pitching himself as a speaker candidate. That is coming from Politico. I kid you not. This can actually happen. There's no rule. See, this is the thing, guys. There's no rule against that. You could be speaker. This is just kind of how it works. So I thought that was a little entertaining, right? But of course, when we talk about this, one of the things that is brought up, this force the vote issue, the fact that Kevin McCarthy has been ousted, has been the squad members in reference to them leveraging and using their power. This clip here from Case Study QB, which I think is important, this talks about how the progressives actually just never really use their power. They admit this openly on MSNBC in reference to the discussion about Kevin McCarthy being ousted as speaker.
I think Sahil had the tweet of the day, actually, where he tweeted and he underscored that Speaker Nancy Pelosi, when she was speaker, had the exact same very slim margin that Kevin McCarthy did. And for all the hemming and hawing that a number of progressives did do privately, nothing like this ever happened while she was Speaker of the House.
That point right there by Simone Sanders, all that does again is show how pathetic the squad has been. They did have that narrow majority. There was this push to force the vote, and they chose not to, right? So this is MSNBC, and Simone Sanders is just making my case for me. This is MSNBC telling you that the progressives, the squad members in the House, they are weak. They didn't use their leverage in reference to any type of concessions. They did not assert their power. So this isn't a gotcha, Simone, like saying that, well, yeah, this thing that's happening with Kevin McCarthy, even when it happened with Nancy Pelosi, that they had the same type of majority, and even the squad members didn't choose to do that. That's not good, Simone. That's really not good. That's actually bad. You're just actually showing that those squad members, that they went along with Democratic Party leadership instead of doing the assignment that was given to them by Justice Democrats, which is to have a hostile take over the Democratic Party. Let me let this finish.
And can one make, we hear all the time the far right and the far left, but even the most progressive members of Congress, Simone, you can't point to anything that they're simply trying to blow up the system, cause chaos, bedlam, or paralysis, which is exactly where the House is right now.
I think Sahil had the tweet.
You see how it works? They were just called out, basically called out. They're not doing anything. They're not bringing the ruckus like they said they would do. Now, I want to take you back to a moment for Force the Vote, where some people tend to forget, like, who actually supported it, right? Like, we all know Jimmy did. We know Bree did. Bree's been very vocal about this. But there were other people who supported it, too, and said that this is the way to leverage power. Now, shout out to neoliberal tears for doing the damn thing, always catching these clips. This is a moment when Crystal Ball actually supported and made the need for Force the Vote. Just a reminder, folks.
Now, there are only two advantages that the left actually has today. One is that the left's economic positions on everything from healthcare, stimulus, wages, and unions are extremely popular. And two, the left has a loud base online and a growing new media ecosystem. So ideas like Force the Vote that combine online pressure with exposing that yawning gap between every establishment figure in Washington and what people actually want, those are exactly the sorts of opportunities that we should be pushing for and should be exploiting. But even beyond this specific idea, the one area where the left is actually in decent shape is online. So why in the world would you unilaterally disarm in that area? Think about it. The bedrock of Sanders' campaign was online, which is exactly the reason that the establishment and their media allies went to such great lengths to turn this strength into a weakness with their whole concocted narrative about toxic Bernie bros. Similarly, AOC and the squad's power doesn't come from the offices that they hold or the committees that they sit on. It comes from the social media armies that they direct. If they aren't interested in leveraging those tools, then they're just ordinary members of Congress who don't actually deserve any more attention than anyone else. The outright dismissal, too, of media as a political force is really weird. Fox.
Notice what she said there. If they don't use this type of power they have, they're just ordinary members of Congress. And that's what we have now.
News was explicitly started as a tool for supporting right-wing politics. And by the way, it's been extraordinarily effective. MSNBC basically determined the Democratic nominee this cycle and sets the agenda for the entire Democratic Party. I think it rather overstates things to imagine that the left has recreated anything like these media powerhouses. But to dismiss the entire project of building a left media ecosystem is incredibly counterproductive. Sure, some actors in the space are better than others. But I'm old enough to remember when there was a lot of panic and hand-wringing about how the right was too dominant online and the kids were doomed to be reactionaries.
So that's just a reminder there. Thank you for that, neoliberal tears, about the people who did support this at that point in time, right? So here's another one from neoliberal tears. Thank you so much for this. Now, this was from Rising recently, where Bree was talking about Force the Vote in reference to the Kevin McCarthy ousting as well, just to go to show you that Force the Vote does actually work. This would have worked. And you have to think about where we would be today as a movement, so to speak, if they would have done what Matt Gaetz did in reference to Kevin McCarthy.
Will you continue voting to fund Ukraine as the #1 issue of who is leading the House of Representatives is a wild, wild shift.
And that's why Force the Vote works, because it forces everyone in Congress, at least anyone who wants a leadership position or wants to have a say, to be very clear on the record how they feel about an issue that's a high priority to the American people. It's literally why Force the Vote works. All right.
That part right there. That's very important. We would have been able to get all of those Congress members on record in reference to if they supported Medicare for all or not, if they were willing to give the people health care during the middle of a pandemic. And so people say, well, it wouldn't pass, That's not the point. The point was to get those people on record. And then what do? You primary challenge those people. And again, like I said, if Nancy Pelosi didn't want to do it, then you don't vote for her as speaker. That's how you use that narrow majority that you have. That's how you use that leverage. And that's how you get some key concessions, not just for your political career, but for the American people. That was a huge mistake on the left for them not to go forward with that. It was a huge mistake for people like TYT and the Majority Report to back out of that. That was a terrible idea. And we could be further along now. But some people still so in their egos that they still don't want to admit it even today.
Why Force the Vote works. All right, stick around. We'll have more Rising for you right after this.
Will you continue?
So just a reminder where we could be today. And it could have been Nancy Pelosi's like, I'm not going to do this. Then Nancy will be gone. And we would just have to say, bye, Nancy. Hit the road, Jack. Don't you come back no more. But the squad would have been using the leverage that they had. Now they don't have any leverage. But the Freedom Caucus does, and they're using it. So hit the road, Jack. So Kevin is gone. Gone, gone, gone. Just like that. Kevin hasn't even been speaker for a year yet.